welcome everyone, and we're really excited to have you here. If you're wondering, am I in the right place? The answer is yes, if your hope is to learn the ins and outs of the modern data stack from those who live in it every single day. So before we kick things off, let's answer the questions that I'm sure are on your minds. If you want to ask questions of any of the people on the panel, all you got to do is head to that Q&A panel in Zoom. I imagine you're quite familiar with that by now, having lived in COVID for quite some time, attending lots of webinars. And we're excited to get as many questions as possible. We have a planned discussion for about 30 minutes, and after that, we'll open it up for anything that's on your mind. And yes, we'll absolutely send you the recording, and we'll do our best to make sure that this is worth a rewatch. Alrighty, so let's get this going and meet the panelists. So to get us started, can each of you provide a quick introduction on yourself, on your company, and then just for fun, since we've got a Star Wars themed panel for the 4th, let us know which character you would be and why. Fraser, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hey everybody, I'm Fraser Harris. I run product at Fivetran. We're the leading automated data integration platform, and we centralize all your data throughout your company, from applications, databases, file sources, etc., to a data warehouse or data lake. And as a product leader, I find myself saying no a lot. Like, stop doing that, don't do that, focus. So I feel a bit like Darth Vader, when he chokes the guy and the officer, like, yeah. So.
Yes, I'm Black. I lead analytics and AI solutions in Google Cloud. And if you were to ask me which Star Wars character I think I am, I think it would be R2-D2. I feel extremely comfortable going into any strange place and basically plugging into whatever socketry that I can find. So I'm very inquisitive and exploratory, and I feel like very aligned with R2-D2.
I'm Boris Chavez. I'm the CEO at a company called Census. Our website's getcensus.com. And we help people operationalize all their data out of their data warehouse so that they can power kind of all sorts of business operations, from sales to marketing to success. And the person I've most modeled, my leadership style on is, I think, a pretty important character called Jean-Luc Picard. And I think he's actually I think the model of how to run a great team and a great ship. But I'll make an exception today and say, like, I'd like to have some air of mystery and like messing with things today. So I guess I'm going to go with Boba Fett.
I'm Neil. I'm the VP product at Mixpanel. We make product analytics for startups and top apps and websites. We help you understand the activity in your product so you can make more informed decisions about improving it. And I'm going to go with Wookiee. I'm a big fan of the Grateful Dead, love fish. And for those of you who know, that makes me a Wook. So.
No Luke Skywalkers, huh? Well, awesome. Let's get into the meat of the discussion. Everyone's here to learn about the modern data stack. So let's start with this. Like, what is that? What does it look like today? And then what does this modern data stack unlock that wasn't possible 2-3 years ago even?
Sure, I can lead that off. The modern data stack really starts with the technology revolution, which is the separation of compute and storage. And this goes back to like 2012 with BigQuery, which started as an internal Google system and kind of became something much bigger as well. And Snowflake and ultimately other data warehouses adopted this new architecture. And it really the big thing it enables is the cost of storage is now practically free. So that means you can centralize all your data in the way that you might have previously done with a data lake, but you can now do it with the schema with your compute integrated. And that's a huge revolution. And that enables you to now centralize everything and then do all these new types of operations on top of data, allowing your organization to be data-driven, both from an analytics side as well as from an operational side.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that the separation of compute and storage lets you do is that it allows you to mix different kinds of processing engines where your data isn't exactly the same place, right? I think data warehouses are close to all of our hearts, and we think in terms of processing data with SQL. But when you think in terms of a data lake and you want to process your data with Spark, it would be awesome. And that's something that, again, the separation of compute and storage allows you to do, is that you can apply analytics, whether it's in Spark, whether it's in SQL, whether it's in Java, Python, whatever, to your data, whether it is in a data warehouse or in a data lake, right? There's a complete separation in terms of not just where your data lives and where your compute lies, not just in the hardware, but in your software stack as well. And increasingly, we see that even with AI, you being able to do AI without moving your data out of this common source storage substrate and different types of compute coming to it.
Yeah, I think that idea that you can really store everything in one place has started to unlock something that we've always talked about, I feel like, for decades and decades, that you can get a single source of truth in your company about everything that matters to you. And that's a lot of how we've seen the modern data stack. It is a way to empower teams to kind of answer any question, and then more importantly, start to drive any part of the business off of a single hub that is that kind of combined infrastructure. Yeah.
When that hub is something like BigQuery, which is like global and completely serverless, that essentially also opens up analytics and opens up the access to data, not just within your company, but even to your suppliers, to your partners. Right. So when we talk about you have all your data in one place, it is you have not only your data, but also the data of the people that you work with in one place.
Yeah, I think that the other thing is the kind of no-ops serverless nature of BigQuery, of Fivetran, of Census, of these types of tools, is that it's also dramatically lowered the barrier to entry to setting up one of these systems. So, you can actually have a ELT tool loading a cloud data warehouse and a reverse ETL tool start pushing intelligence to the tools that people are using and get that set up very quickly, like even without a dedicated team in a week or two. And that's a huge difference.
And it really scales up the impact of a team that's using something like a Fivetran, because now that team can go land the data into a BigQuery and now basically enable the rest of the organization. It simplifies the data engineering when you need to just land it in one place rather than basically create a whole bunch of peer-to-peer integration points. And I think we talk about this whole idea of fan in, right? You fan into this one data warehouse, and then you fan out in terms of all of your use cases that you can support.
Yeah, and I think we can't underplay like the fact that this technology spans small use cases all the way to infinitely large use cases, where there's no breaking point where you're going to have to move off of a data warehouse is really, really empowering for teams to invest in. And I think tools like Fivetran or Census make it so that any idea can be tested, implemented, iterated on without having to turn it into like a large, complicated project, which is, I think, how these things used to go. Is anything related to data was, well, we're gonna have to figure out how to budget the whole thing, and it's complicated, and it's gonna take 6 months, and that's changed.
And it's not just a project. It's not like, okay, it's going to take me 6 months to build the system. It doesn't take you 6 months anymore to build the system. But also, it's going to take me a day to run this and this data engineering job. It doesn't take a day anymore. Right. In fact, you can often do it on the fly. You can do it as the data arrives, and that's a significant change in the way that we operate our business on data.
The other major change is, like, now that you can store everything, you just bring everything in. And in the previous generation of technology, you had to do all this transformation in the pipeline as you were moving data in. So that means you had this small group of data engineers who are like extremely expensive. Their time is very valuable. And these projects would just go on for months trying to predict what were the future needs of the data in the data warehouse. Well, the new technology enables ELT, so extract, load, bring it all in, and then transform within the data warehouse. So as the business needs are changing, you can just update your transformations logic. And best practices, it's under version control, it's peer reviewed, bringing all these best practices from software development.
And different projects can have different transformations that they have because the data is all
that's
there.
the key, right? And like that separation of workload is way more fundamental than we ever expected, right? Which is you can have different operational use cases kind of attached to the same data set. And that I think was the thing that it made using the warehouse before this actually kind of impossible for operational use cases because you'd be stepping on the same infrastructure and it's something
everybody has to agree on a schema. We're not talking about everybody agreeing on a schema. And in fact, we're also talking about automation here, right? So it's not that you have to do this on the fly. You can say, here's the ELT that I need to do. And once you kind of say, okay, here's what I need to support for this use case, now go make a materialized view out of this. And then the data warehouse takes care of making sure that that view is up to date with all of the changes that happen without we don't have to build these pipelines and manage them and maintain them. All of that stuff also moves into the data warehouse, making it much simpler to operate.
Yeah. And the logic is now all in SQL, which is like, you've got this army of data analysts who know SQL, and now you're empowering them to take on more of that transformation and modeling work. And that's a huge unblocker for so many companies. And going back to from like the small use case, the startup, all the way to your biggest organizations, like we see often for our smallest
megabytes
customers,
to
like,
petabytes.
Yeah. We see like the CEO being like, I want to understand what's going on, and he's writing his own SQL, right? Or he or she.
Well, it's not, but Fraser, it's not just the size, right? Like we see people they're trying to operationalize their data into, let's say, product, external users, or an email marketing scenario, or a customer support scenario. And each of those has very different performance requirements. And in the old days, you would not have the confidence to run all of those because one of them would step on the other and then game over, right? Like now you have brownouts, you have performance concerns that you can't diagnose. And this is why people don't attach.
And you also have these clusters that you have to go fight your other internal teams for time on, right? Okay, I need to run this thing. Nope. I have this other job running that's going to take up, and so, all that stuff goes away.
We've turned that basically just into a dollar conversation, which is much more tractable, and it's super empowering. So I think a lot of that has to do with what makes the modern data stack so great.
Yeah, and the fan in, fan out, like making the data warehouse the hub. You can use tools like DBT to govern and really validate the data that you've got and get it into a very clean, usable state for everyone. Because that's centralized, that means that effort by the engineers that are working on that, or the analysts that are working on that effort becomes much more leveraged, because now every use case of data that it fans out to gets the benefit of that work.
And also much more secure, right? Because you don't have all these copies of data lying around somewhere unsecured. You don't know where the data went. It's in that one place, and everything is audited. You know exactly who ran which queries, where did they run it. So the security posture dramatically improves once you have this kind of an architecture in place.
Yeah. I mean, Fraser and I talk about this a lot in other fora, but this is really the change that's happening in the analysts and in the kind of practitioners is very much learning all the lessons and adapting all the lessons from software engineering to this world, because everything they do now is massively leveraged, which means the impact is significant, but also the responsibility is significant. So yeah, I think versioning your transform code becomes super powerful and important. Testing your data as it goes out, validating it, and then having a system that deploys in a consistent way. All of that is like very, very important and growing as a practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and a more subtle benefit is that for all these source systems, like your Mixpanel data, it's coming in a standardized schema. And that enables us to now use standardized packages for modeling that data that you can just plug on top, and skipping like some really difficult and complex analytics work and getting that into a shape that now your analysts can start doing, understanding what's going on in your business or operations.
And I mean, absolutely, that's where all the connectors come in, right? If you have Salesforce data, you have a connector for Salesforce data. You don't have to build all that. You can go use the Fivetran connector, land it into BigQuery, and now like the world's your oyster at that point, as far as joining that Salesforce data with something else that you already have in your business.
And I think one of the shifts has been that the tools that are the spokes around that hub are both sources and destinations. I think, I certainly used to think in terms of data sort of flowing in one direction of, you had your systems of record and you pull those into your data warehouse and then you analyze them. But now something like Salesforce becomes both a source and a destination. So
Totally.
It's a record for all kinds of sales activity that gets pulled into the data warehouse. It can then get joined and processed with other data. And then the things like user activity within accounts and that sort of thing can get pushed back out to Salesforce, where it becomes intelligence for the sales team and allows.
And we see that a lot with SAP and supply chain, pulling the data and then conjoining it with your marketing information, logistics information, and then taking these insights and pushing them back into your planning systems and so on. So we see that two-way thing quite a bit.
Right. It's like, Neil, there's a duality, right? Where it's like, it's a refining process, right? Where data comes in, you transform it, you analyze it, you get insights, but it's really a feedback loop, right? And it goes even from same system back to same system, but transiting through the centralized transform layer where you can derive these insights and
derive these insights from other things, right? That way, like you've broken down the silos of each of these tools.
Absolutely.
Because you're now basically getting your insights from all these other places, and the data warehouse becomes a way that you do that.
I mean, what's a classic example, right? People want to determine what sales lead will have a higher propensity to convert, right? Classic problem that everyone wants to solve. So you want to use the information from Salesforce, right, to determine what, which leads were actually closed, but you want to combine that with product signals, billing signals, all sorts of like marketing signals. Those live in the warehouse. That join can be derived down into, let's say, a score, a probability. And what's the point of that if not to push it back into Salesforce to drive the actions of the next salesperson, right? And so that is how the kind of the loop is closed. And I think we used to close these. I think in the world before the modern data stack, like we used to close that loop with a visualization, with a chart. And I think now people have moved to the point where it's like, why am I not driving the actions directly and putting that end to end?
So this is actually a perfect segue to the next question, if you all will. So far we've focused largely on what the stack looks like, the benefits of centralizing. Ultimately, data is an input to a broader purpose. And we got to some of these already, but ultimately providing insights to business users. So not the data engineers, but the product teams, the executives, the others throughout the business. So for this question, I want to focus there. So Neil, you lead product at Mixpanel. Curious what you're hearing from customers. You talk with tons about their analysis needs. If a company is centralizing their data in warehouse, how are they doing product analytics? Are PMs expected to write SQL? What's the best practice there?
Yeah, so I think, the two most common things I hear when I ask our customers, what are you hoping to accomplish with product analytics is, well, I'm hoping that everyone will use it, everyone across engineering and product and design, everyone who's making changes to the product and the user experience. And then I hope they can go deep and really answer sort of more complex questions that you often need to make good prioritization decisions. And certainly, like, I think SQL is a really powerful way to have total flexibility to sort of ask any question. And I think people can learn SQL. The issue is it's often slow. It's just forming the query. A complex onboarding funnel segmented a few ways, maybe pages and pages of SQL. And so it's much easier to do that if you have a tool that's dedicated to it. And provide, and that's, you haven't even begun to sort of visualize your answer at that point. So so they want to use a tool that's a dedicated product analytics tool that's meant to do that type of workflow and make that much faster for the team to answer more questions much more quickly. And in the past, the issue's been that product analytics tools have kind of existed in a siloed stack. You collect your event data to them, and they're a closed loop system. So what we're doing is bringing product analytics to the modern data stack and helping customers plug into the good this unified trusted data that we've been talking about that's in their data warehouse, and load that into a tool that's purpose built for answering product questions for the product team. And in that sense, we're another spoke on that in that system. And so just the way the sales team's using Salesforce, product team uses product analytics, Mixpanel, and we're both a source and a destination for data from the data stack.
Cool. This is a perfect segue again. So Boris, you talk a lot about how companies can operationalize data better with your product, Mixpanel being one of those. You're not the first company to try to solve this problem. Could you kind of let everyone know what your unique approach is there and how it's changing things in the market?
Sure. I think we talk a lot about the modern data stack as a piece of infrastructure, right? Or as a combination of pieces that generate a total infrastructure. And I think about the parallel effect on how you should think about your data team and what their role should be in the company. And the hub and spoke infrastructure model really lends itself to, therefore, a data team that serves every part of the company with the right information. And Census, right, the core idea when we started the company a few years back was, how do you help the data team provide information out to every part of the business, but not in a reactive ad hoc way, which is, I think, how we've done it in the past, where, I need a report, right? But rather into a systematic product approach, right? Like a service provider approach, and do that for every part of the company. So what Census does, it says, I can connect to your data warehouse for you in an automated fashion, very similar to Fivetran, and allow you to, using only your SQL skills, syndicate data out, right? Push data out, deploy data out to products like Mixpanel, product like Salesforce, each of which allows you to empower a different part of your business, and thus makes your data team actually maybe the most critical team in the company. But I think that's really my mission here, is to help data teams, deliver the maximum value and be among the most important people in the company.
Great.
I like that. I'm not sure if it's true, but I like thinking.
Well, I think we're not there yet, right, Fraser? Like, I can definitely name a few data teams in the industry where that's the case, but absolutely not. We know, because there's no chief data officers at large, right? There's very few. So I think maybe what's unique about our approach is not just like our technology, but also like the kind of philosophy we espouse, is that data teams should be repositioned as, instead of being an asynchronous batch analysis kind of end of the quarter oriented team, to, we're a platform team. We basically empower not just product like Neil's talking about, but sales, support, marketing, finance. There's so many parts of the company that need the correct data. And the only system that has the correct data is the data team in the data warehouse. And so that's really the core of Census's design, is to say, how do we do this at scale, where you can seamlessly push data out of a data warehouse without Census having your data? So I think traditional solutions to data integration and data centralization were to have yet another system, right? Oh, you could call it a CDP, right? Like, it's another system that has all of your data and like does all the magical transformations. And the whole point is, the data warehouse solves this, right? The data team has the SQL skills. They have the Python skills. They can do all that interesting transformation and version it. And all you really need then is to kind of build that last mile. And that's what Census does. It's that last mile out of the data warehouse into all these systems. And then all that remains is making sure that you can have the highest confidence possible. So I think probably the most interesting feature we've ever built is helping people validate data on the way out. Because when you operationalize data, you're playing with live ammo, as I like to say. So, it's not a chart that's going to break. You're going to break emails. You're going to break external users. You're going to break sales calls where people are going to make calls to people. They're going to be wrong. And so validating and testing your data on the way out is actually super important. And one of the things that kind of we espouse as a product.
Yeah, can't emphasize that enough. Like, you have to test your data. And, we do that through Fivetran orchestration of DBT, which is this open source project that does brings all these amazing capabilities that I've talked about: version control, peer review, reusable code, and tests.
We are both, I think, deep believers in using DBT for all this.
So continuing in this spirit of operationalizing data, which is the topic at hand, Lack, when we did the conversations before this panel, you brought up something really interesting that would be good to share with everyone. If you have this perspective of why you need to move from a data-centric to an analysis-centric organization, like, what does this mean? How do you do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've been hitting on many of these points today, like, when Boris talks about, the whole idea of the data team being central and moving to more service-oriented things. So what I'm talking about here is that for the longest time, data was a noun, right? And really what we need to think of is what you do with the data. And more organizations need to move from data being something that you hold to something that you do things with. And that's the analysis-centric thing. And like the 4 different ideas that I'll basically that all connect together to make this this vision possible. Firstly, your data engineering teams, right? If they have to basically spend hours to basically transform data, then obviously now that data that you get is going to be a static piece of data. You've created a report, and that report is something that everybody basically reads. Whereas now, if that entire analysis can be done on the fly, seconds instead of hours, now you're basically providing interactivity to all of your teams. Anybody with the ability to write SQL is now being able to make changes, adapt, try things out. So that interactivity is the first pillar, if you will, in terms of basically going from a data-centric organization to an analysis-centric organization. You're opening up not the data, but the ability to analyze the data. The second thing that's equally important is, and this is something that we work with a bank, and it used to basically take them 3 days to calculate their liquidity position from internationally. And they were basically able to do that up to the minute by landing the data in real time into BigQuery. And as soon as you do that, now their liquidity position is up to the minute, right? Anytime you basically have a dashboard that shows liquidity, that liquidity is real time, right? It's basically showing, it's not 3 days delayed anymore. It is up to the minute. And that's equally important, right? That's the second bit that allows people to make decisions off the data, knowing that, to Boris's point, it's not a batch thing. It's not like I need a report now. The report is always there because it's a dashboard, and that dashboard is always up to date. The third thing that's, again, comes back to that compute and storage discussion that we talked about, is that it's not about one piece of data. It's about joining all of the pieces of data to carry out your analysis. So breaking down those data silos. And that's, again, and the third important pillar here, that when we talk about centralizing the data, putting it in one place, you've broken down your data silos, you have the golden copy of the data. And the fourth thing, again, that's close to my heart, is increasingly we are able to do not just descriptive analytics, what happened in the past, but being able to basically take that and apply predictive analytics to it. What could happen, right? Being able to predict new values of a time series, predict, carry out insights like who should we carry out remarketing to, AI in the data warehouse. Put all these 4 things together: interactivity, up to the minute, breaking down data silos, doing predictive analytics. And all of a sudden now you start to see we're really talking about what you can do with the data, not about what data you have. You've moved from being a data-centric organization to being an analysis-centric organization. People who are actually making use of the data in real time, all of the data in one place, and not just looking historically, but applying it forward, being predictive.
We got one final discussion prompt, and then there's some really great questions coming in that we're excited to get to after that. So let's end on a really tangible note for those listening in. Let's say you want to modernize your data stack. You want to centralize around the warehouse. You want to bring in some best-in-class tools. Where should you start? And then are there any mistakes that you've seen companies make when they're getting set up and moving down this path towards the modern data stack?
Okay, mistake, right? There's one mistake that I see very commonly. And I think it's because of the way we use the word. We talk about centralizing data, and centralizing data does not mean centralizing control of the data. We're putting the data into one place. This is this global place like BigQuery. It's just one BigQuery. All data lands there. However, the ownership of the data has to lie with the teams that know the data best. The owners of the data, the people who produce the data typically are the people who use the data the most. Financial data has to be under the control of the finance department. It shouldn't be under the control of IT. You don't go around centralizing your data and put your financial, all of your financial data mart. Don't go put that in under the IT control. So sometimes when we talk about centralizing data, people get this wrong impression that what we're talking about is centralizing control of the data. These are two separate things. The data is in BigQuery, all data is in BigQuery, so that you've broken down your data silos so that you can go do all of your connections, you can do a great analysis, but every data set is under the control of the teams that know it best. That's super important to maintain data quality. So I'll stop there, right? So centralizing data doesn't mean centralizing control of the data. And we want to basically keep governance and physical location separate, right? That's an important distinction to keep in mind.
That's such a good point, Lak. Like we've baked into our governance models, team-based governance of data, because they know like what do these terms mean in the data. Like you're looking at column names and descriptions, trying to, as an outsider being like, what's going on? Yeah.
I mean, there's prior art on this, right? Like the same thing happened 10 years ago with like the consumerization of IT, where it's not like your CIO who's literally creating fields in Salesforce. And if they are, you're definitely doing it wrong. They approve the purchase perhaps, but like ultimately, those teams are empowered to do what they're supposed to do. And I think the data warehouse is just a super conglomerate of like all of those data sets. So I totally agree with you, Fraser.
Yeah. In terms of where you should start, start a free Fivetran trial, get that data integrated in like less than a day and you're rocking. But talking about pitfalls, there's one that we see over and over again, which has to do with streaming data. Aha. Like everyone is.
The reason we're talking about this is that we had the pre-discussion. We got into a heated argument about how important is streaming really.
Yeah, and there's a lot of pitfalls with streaming data in terms of, especially around the consistency of data and then how you have to treat it. So when it arrives, you need to do a bunch of prep work to make sure that to guarantee the consistency. And I'm actually going to share a link right now to panelists and attendees. Just a fantastic post about internal consistency in streaming systems and all the pitfalls. And so what we challenge everyone we work with is you really understand the requirements of any given project. Do you actually need sub 1 minute latency of data? Because if you do, then you're looking at an order of magnitude in terms of complexity, the team that needs to support that, versus can you get away with a just 1 minute or 5 minute latency of data? So really deeply dig into that.
The difference between a streaming system and say a microbatch system, where you say, okay, I'm going to do this computation once an hour because an hour latency is good enough for me. Okay, I mean, of course, I come from the sense that we have systems where batch and stream are exactly the same, right? We basically allow you to land your data, do your streaming analytics exactly the same way that you would do batch analytics. When you do SQL on BigQuery, it is always reflecting the latest data. You can do SQL in BigQuery that is actually run on Dataflow, and therefore it's basically carrying tumbling operations. So like, there's this whole modernization that's happening in terms of where you do the streaming and how you do the streaming as well.
I think going back to sort of where to begin thing, I think I think Boris said that data is becoming a platform, and some of these themes were in what it means to become analysis driven. But I think you want to think of data like a product, and a product for the teams in your company to use to be successful. And so kind of like a lot of the typical product principles apply, which is that you want to work backward from actual use cases and needs, and you want to get something working end to end as quickly as possible. And I think Lack touched on the importance of it being automated, sort of not something that's a one-off manual task that someone has to go do each time you want that report or each time you want to answer that question. Get it into a self-serve system that is automatically up to date, and even just getting one thing in that state, I think and the starting point is you want to build around a cloud data warehouse. So start there, and then I think actually the richest data source in most companies is, or at least most software companies, is their application database. And get your application database into your data warehouse, and then use something like dbt to automate the materialized views that you want of that data. And then you can start to layer in Fivetran to bring in more sources, Census to push it to other systems, Mixpanel to analyze.
And we keep mentioning dbt. I just want to say that there are a lot of orchestration tools out there. You can use Dataform, you can use dbt, you can use Airflow Composer. There's like multiple options here, right? So dbt is great in that it is SQL, but there are other things like Dataform. And one of the big benefits, I think, of moving to a system like that's cloud-based is the options that you have and the flexibility that you have.
The thing I was going to riff on based on what you said, Neil, is I think the biggest thing I try to teach people when it comes to like product thinking is iterate and start small, right?
Yeah.
And so I deeply agree with you. And that often comes down to take even the example you said. Well, the application database is like probably the first thing you want to take advantage of, but it takes potentially a really long time to distill all of the weird schemas of the transactional system and distill that into useful things. So start with one, like number of users. Like you don't have to start with like all the metrics getting all like cleaned up and figured out. Like
that is so important. You don't need to mirror your entire operational data set. Like change data capture doesn't mean you have to get that entire thing. Start with one use case.
And so
learn, and then
it's unbelievably common for us to have a customer. Like I try to push customers to go like, you could sync data, like one metric. You could sync like, just one thing, like how, like literally I'm not even exaggerating here. Like how many users are active in the account, and put that into your, your CS tool. And that alone will drive value. And you can expand from there. And the whole philosophy for you is to move away from quarterly, yearly thinking into every day you can ship new stuff, right?
Yeah. I remember working with a customer, and literally all we did was basically get every transaction that happened, that's a purchase that happened, and like 5 fields out of that purchase. And that was it. That was the only thing that we mirrored. And as we start mirroring those, then they were able to go build a demand forecasting model. They were able to build a remarketing model out of 5 fields and already providing incredible value. And then they were saying, okay, in addition, if we could bring this other piece of data in, we could improve this decision that we're making. And that hypothesis-driven approach to building out a large system is incredibly important.
All right, everyone, let's move to audience Q&A. There's some really great questions coming in. So the first one is from Haley, and the question is, what is the difference of the CDP versus the data warehouse? Should they go hand in hand? and how. And I think, Boris, you were going to take this one to
Sure.
start, at least.
And I think actually Bastien asked a very, very similar question of like, will the modern data stack replace customer data platforms or work alongside them? So I'll post like a blog post that we wrote a while back about this topic for people that really want to nerd out. But the first thing is, first of all, side by side, of course, works, right? Like CDPs, you can think of Salesforce as a kind of CDP, right? It's just anything that CDP is a fancy word for storing customer data and like transforming it and then doing something with it. And ultimately a CRM is a kind of CDP. I think the main thing is, where do you want to maintain the primary rules about how your data is transformed and how you arrive at the correct answer for questions? And the problem is you want to, as much as possible within the organization, reduce the duplication on that front. So if you were to calculate, what is a delinquent customer, that might be the combination of joining data from your billing system, from what plan they're on, which might be from another part of the system, and their credit card payments, and all sorts of things that combine into, are they delinquent? Did we even send them an email about the delinquency? And that's a series of transforms. You can do that in a CDP. You can do that in a warehouse. The point is to try not to duplicate that. So as much as possible, you want to have...
Your CDP might be built on top of the data warehouse.
That's, I think, the correct way to think about it, right? That the hub and spoke model, and yes, Daniel, CDP stands for Customer Data Platform. The CDP should be a spoke in the hub and spoke model where the warehouse lives. And so that's probably the best way to think about it. And they will live side by side for some time to come. I think going far enough into the future, I think the user experience of running directly on a warehouse is just getting better and better and better, right? Fivetran makes it so trivial to bring new data into a warehouse that it's arguably easier to do that than to do that in any other platform.
This is actually something that we see. Like CDP is one example of these kinds of data marts that people have built for very specific use cases.
Exactly.
Everything from logistics to planning to finance. Like like one of our customers basically has thousands of pipelines that basically help support the financial use cases. Okay, and so when you talk to them, they talk about their financial data platform, but ultimately it runs on BigQuery. Right. And the data warehouse that supports
a CDP is a data warehouse as a service, right? It's like a
right, exactly.
It's a narrower data warehouse.
We have many customers that are CDPs, so they're using us at Fivetran, powered by Fivetran, which is our embedded use case. So their customers are, unbeknownst to them, are using Fivetran to move the data into a data warehouse that the CDP is hosting for them. A CDP really only does two things for you. So at its heart, there's an account table, a user table, an event table. And that's your customer data. And they do two specialized things. One is identity resolution. So you have all this event data coming in. How do you know it's the same person, this anonymous user?
And that's a super hard problem. That is a super hard problem.
It is absolutely a hard problem.
People log in with different devices. They have multiple people on an account.
It's definitely a hard problem. The question is not whether it's a hard problem, is where in your stack do you want that resolved so that it can be shared with the right set of systems, right?
Exactly.
For sure.
Yeah. And the second thing a CDP does allows a marketer to make lists of people to target and then ship that off into other systems. And that's the business logic that Boris is talking about, is like when they're deciding on those lists of users, those segments. Fivetran, we do it internally in our own data warehouse. And we just write SQL queries, and then we have that governed, like those SQL queries governed with tests before we send that out into any marketing system with Census.
So.
All right, we got another great question that's related to the discussion. This one's from Michael, and he says, to anyone, but based on what I've heard, perhaps Fraser or Boris, when using dbt in your warehouse as the central hub for data, how have you managed limitations of real-time flows of data with dbt? They, dbt themselves, say they're not good for real-time data. Thank you.
It's a great question. I think Fraser and I probably both want to answer it, but I'll take the first step, Fraser, and you can correct me. So first and foremost, you always have to get back to like, what do you mean by real time? and this is where team like Boris and Fraser on one team, Locke is on another team, just for the sake of like a fight to emerge. But really there's a barrier around, whether that's 1 second or in the microseconds, like there's a barrier somewhere where you transition to different technology altogether. And absolutely, DBT cannot serve that purpose in any form today. So if you're running like a Kafka streaming infrastructure, like DBT is not the technology you're gonna jump onto. But the warehouse, especially thanks to all of the work that BigQuery's done, is closer and closer to be able to serve what you would call near real-time scenarios.
Exactly. So I mean, this is about being up to date data. We're not talking like there's a difference between reacting to events as they happen,
right?
Which is something that is core streaming analytics, and that's a data flow on the Google Cloud platform,
right?
And having up to the minute data, which is the use case that a BigQuery solves. And a lot of people use it for example, now you're running a Firebase mobile app, and you want to basically figure out if your application is crashing too often, or you're basically a game developer, you're sending all your game events into BigQuery, and you want to figure out which characters are getting used more often than other characters. You want that to be you want that to be up to date, right? You don't want this thing to be like stale, right? There's a difference between stale and up to date, which is one category of use cases that a data warehouse is amazing for. And there is event-driven processing. When the event happens, I need to basically react on it. And that is a data flow use case. That is not a good use case for a data warehouse.
But I think to get really specific on because this clearly, I think Michael knows enough about DBT here to be very specific in his question. Like, you're right that spinning up an entire DBT run of your 100 or 1,000 models, you're not going to complete that in 5 seconds. It's just never going to happen. But the nice thing about DBT is you can actually have specific runs on just a single model and just run a very isolated part of your DAG to get those insights at higher speed. So in many ways, we work with customers to say, like, look, do you have requirements that move you closer and closer to, let's say we're going to call near real time? Then you run that part of your stack on a different cadence, and that kind of gets you quite a bit of the way there. And I think
and in true real time, then you move into data flow templates.
Exactly.
You move into pub sub and data flow that
totally.
lands your data as it happens.
Yeah.
But again, I think we're all agreed that the as it happens is a much smaller subset of use cases. Then you don't want the data to be stale, and you want it to be as up to date as possible.
And where we draw the line of Fivetran is 1 minute. If you want to go sub 1 minute latencies, like for end-to-end systems, then you need to go to a streaming. And that's the real question is like, what does real time mean for this use case? And does the business benefit you're getting justify that step? And it does take like a critical eye of like, well, what if this was 2 minute latency? Does that really defeat the benefits that we would have gotten? Because you're going to save an enormous amount of time and effort, and your data engineers being on call for when you do have issues, because just due to the nature of data, and particularly in source systems, the schema evolving, you have issues somewhere along your data pipeline. And we do our best at Fivetran to handle that all for you. But just keep those in mind. Like,
I think that there's a fundamental trade of time and completeness and correctness. That's the other thing, if you don't have that sub-minute or sub-hour kind of requirement, and you actually want to make good decisions, or you're automating some system that really needs to be correct, then let's say you're collecting data from mobile apps. There's going to be latency there as they connect to the network at different times and that sort of thing. And so often there's a lagging, there's a time period in which you're still collecting data for a historical period, right? Like the data for May 4th is going to trickle in still on May 5th and May 6th. And so if you really want the truth about that day, then you have to wait for it anyway. So I think it's very specific to the use case. And as Lack just said, it's true real time is actually typically a much narrower set of use cases where it's needed. And it's often just not worth the additional overhead and the trade against correctness.
Thanks everyone. So there's two last questions here that we want to get to. There's one from David. Let me summarize something that I think would apply to everyone, then I'll read a specific question. is there ever a circumstance where you'd spin up multiple warehouses? Like, when would you do that? David's specific question is, if our company has to provide analytics to not only internal teams and stakeholders, but also external customers, would this generally lead to spinning up two separate databases or warehouses? Separate databases for separate traffic that prevent noisy neighbor problem, while on the flip side, you can see there being a burden of maintaining two different systems. So kind of to circle back, like,
I mean, the
I
beauty of
just want
the
to
modern data
say
stack,
that
you
there
no
is
longer need
no
to do
such
that.
thing as multiple data warehouses. It is serverless. Okay, there is just one BigQuery, right? There's not a question of yes, maybe you have multiple projects, but you basically do it through Cloud IAM, right? Cloud Identity Access Management is how, again, that's what we talk about, separate control of the data from where it physically is. The noisy neighbor problem, etc., is really not that much of a concern, right? If you can choose a region that you're going to be running things on, if that is important to you, but for the most part, even like just let those things go and really think in terms of separation of compute and storage. And all of your storage is in one BigQuery or on Google Cloud Storage or wherever it is, and you can basically apply analytics to it. So even if you have your data in Parquet files, you can still use a BigQuery SQL and basically carry this out.
I only see two places where there's actual reasons to use two separate warehouses, and I use warehouse like liberally here because the separation compute storage. But one is when you have data residency compliance. So where data, for example, must live in Europe and can't like be in other geographies. And the second one is where you have a corporation with subcorporations. And due to licensing with their customers, there might be requirements around keeping that data completely isolated. And that would be
isolated you can do with projects. But you're right. The first one, like, if you need your data to be resident in Frankfurt, you can choose for the data to be resident in Frankfurt, and then you cannot join that data with any data that's not in Frankfurt. But even that is currently like a technology limitation. It's not really a conceptual limitation, and I would not imagine that in the long term that we're going to basically be faced with limitations on how you can join data that lives in different localities. Now, as long as your legal structure, etc., supports it, the technology should be able to support it.
Yeah, I think David, to David's question, like the noisy neighbor problem no longer exists in the modern data stack.
Yeah.
Like
that
problem doesn't exist.
It's not your problem anymore.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
it really is.
If it does file a bug against
Google's
Google,
problem.
that's pretty much it.
Yeah,
right?
and that's the thing that I think Fraser and I were trying to say at the very beginning is like the things that you can unlock by no longer having the noisy neighbor problem are just amazing.
All right, we got time for one last question. We're almost at the top of the hour. It's been a great discussion. We hit on real time a bit before, so just want to throw this out in case any of you have anything to add. Question from Bastian is, how promising is real-time data processing in warehouses? And then what are real-time use cases that yield significant value for companies?
Not real-time data processing. Again, we want to basically be very, very clear here that what we're talking about is up-to-date data, right? Having data that is not stale. And given that, is that useful? Yes, absolutely. Depends on the speed of your business. Depends on, like, I think, Fraser talked about, you want it to be, is it under a minute or more than a minute? Okay, so that's one way to think about it. But if you need true real-time data processing, then you're not in the data warehouse anymore. You're in basically stream analytics land, and that's a different land altogether.
All right. Well, that's a wrap. It's great to see that many of you who joined at the beginning are still with us almost an hour later. I want to thank all the panelists, and for all you listen in, we will send out the recording as soon as possible. And thanks so much for your time.